Okay, so you want to get into matcha. You've seen the numbers. A tin of that vivid green powder, 30 grams, barely a handful, sells for $30. The cafe on the corner turns a single gram of it into a $7 latte. The whole world seems to have decided at once that this is the drink of the future. Clean energy, calm focus, an aesthetic so photogenic it markets itself. You picture a quiet tea field in Japan, mist sitting on the hills, a craft passed down for centuries, and a product people line up to overpay for. That's the picture. That's what the Instagram grid sells you. Here's what the grid doesn't show you: the stone mill that grinds one serving of powder in the time it takes to watch this sentence, and cannot be made to go faster. The farmer who is 73 years old with nobody lined up to take over the field. The shade covers that have to go up on exactly the right day, or the entire harvest drops a grade. And the fact that the reason your matcha got more expensive last year has nothing to do with greed. It's that the world asked for something the supply chain physically cannot produce on demand. Matcha looks like a beverage. It is actually one of the slowest, most supply-constrained agricultural products on Earth, wearing a very modern coat of paint. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly where every dollar of that latte goes, why almost none of it reaches the person who grew it, and why the shortage you keep hearing about was mathematically guaranteed. Before we talk about money, we need to talk about what matcha actually is, because matcha is one of those words that gets stamped onto about 5 different products that share almost nothing except the color. Real matcha begins as a specific leaf called tencha, and tencha is not simply green tea leaves. For roughly the last 3 to 4 weeks before harvest, the tea bushes are deliberately covered, shaded under tarps or reed screens that block most of the sunlight. Starved of light, the plant panics. It floods its leaves with chlorophyll to catch what little sun remains, which is what produces that unnaturally deep green. And it builds up an amino acid called L-theanine, which is the source of matcha's savory, almost brothy sweetness and its calm alertness effect. Shading also suppresses the bitter compounds. So before a single leaf is picked, the farmer has spent weeks making the plant work harder for less yield. That is the first thing to understand. Everything that makes matcha matcha is the result of deliberately lowering the productivity of the field. After harvest, the leaves are steamed to lock in color, dried flat, and then the stems and veins are painstakingly stripped away, leaving only the soft leaf flesh. That deveined, dried leaf is tencha. It is still not matcha. It becomes matcha only when it's ground into powder. And this is where the whole economic story hides, because tencha is ground on granite stone mills, slow-turning wheels that produce, at the high end, around 30 to 40 grams of powder per hour, per mill, per hour. Let that number sit. A single mill running all day, every day, produces roughly enough matcha to fill a couple dozen tins. If you want 10 times the output, you don't press a button. You need 10 more mills and the space to house them, and someone to run them. You cannot simply grind faster because friction generates heat, and heat scorches the powder. It dulls the color, cooks off the aroma, and turns a ceremonial product into something that tastes flat. The bottleneck isn't a factory that hasn't been built yet. The bottleneck is physics, and every step feeding those mills carries its own hidden cost. Shading isn't free. It's structures, material, and labor, installed and removed by hand on a schedule the weather dictates, not you. Harvesting the first flush by hand means paying people for delicate, skilled work in a window that lasts days. The deveining and sorting that separates leaf flesh from stem is fussy, exacting, and slow. And the mills themselves are capital. Carved granite that has to be dressed and maintained, running on electricity around the clock to produce those 40 grams an hour. Now factor in the yield loss baked into the whole process. You shaded the field to reduce what it produces, you threw away the stems, and you rejected everything that didn't make grade. By the time powder reaches a tin, an enormous fraction of the original plant has been deliberately discarded. You are not selling what the field grew. You're selling the small, perfect remainder of it. Now, that word ceremonial matters because grade is the entire pricing game. At the top sits ceremonial grade matcha. First harvest leaves picked in spring, the youngest and most tender. Shaded the longest, stone ground the slowest, meant to be whisked with nothing but hot water. Below that is culinary grade, later harvests, coarser leaves, more bitterness, cheaper, built to survive being buried under milk and sugar in a latte or a cake. The gap between them at the wholesale level can be 3, 4, 5 times per kilogram. And here's the trap for anyone trying to cash in. Most of the demand exploding right now is for lattes, which only need culinary grade. But the prestige, the photographs, the story people fell in love with, all belong to the ceremonial tier, which is the one that's hardest and slowest to make more of. So you decide the way in is to grow it yourself. Buy the land, plant the bushes, control the supply. Here's the problem with that plan. A newly planted tea bush takes roughly 5 years before it yields leaves worth harvesting, and closer to 7 before it's mature. You are signing up to spend money for half a decade before the first real crop. And it can't be just any land. The best matcha comes from a short list of regions: Uji, near Kyoto; Nishio, Kagoshima, Shizuoka, where the soil, the climate, and generations of accumulated technique already exist. You are not buying dirt. You're buying proximity to knowledge that took 100 years to build, and that knowledge does not transplant. Consider what happened when the industry tried to scale its way out of this. Uji, the historic heart of matcha outside Kyoto, is hemmed in. Limited flat land, sky-high property values, and farms measured in tiny plots worked by hand. It is, in effect, maxed out. So the growth went south to Kagoshima, at the bottom of Japan, where the land is flatter and more open, and it was possible to plant Tencha at a scale Uji never could, with more machinery and larger contiguous fields. Kagoshima became the region that actually expanded matcha output. But notice what that expansion did and didn't solve. It added more raw Tencha. It did nothing to speed up the granite mills, nothing to reverse the aging of the growers, nothing to make the spring harvest arrive twice. The one region built to scale still runs into the same wall at the grinding stage as the boutique houses in Kyoto. You can grow more leaf, you still cannot grind it any faster. Scale relieved one bottleneck and slammed straight into the next. Then there's the harvest itself. The premium first flush, Ichiban cha, comes once a year in spring, and it is fragile. A late frost at the wrong moment can damage the young leaves and wipe out the highest value portion of your entire year in a single cold night. The best leaves are still often picked by hand because a machine can't reliably separate the tender top leaves from the tougher ones below. Hand picking means labor, and labor is exactly where Japan's tea industry is quietly breaking. Here is the structural problem sitting under everything. The people who grow Tencha are old, and there are fewer of them every year. The average Japanese tea farmer is well into their 60s, many past 70, and when they retire, the field frequently goes with them because their children took salaried jobs in the cities decades ago. Japan's total tea growing area has been shrinking for years. Tencha is a specialty within that shrinking base. Only a small fraction of Japan's tea is grown for matcha at all. So you have a product where the raw input is produced by an aging, contracting workforce on a bush that takes 5 years to mature, shaded by hand, picked in a narrow window, and ground at 40 grams an hour. Every single stage resists scaling. That is not a supply chain. It's a series of bottlenecks stacked end to end. And then, in 2024 and into 2025, the demand side did something the supply side had no way to answer. Matcha went viral. Health media and social media discovered it at the same moment. The calm energy, the antioxidants, the ritual, the color that looks perfect on camera. Cafés from Los Angeles to Sydney to Dubai put matcha on the menu at once. Tourists flooding back into Japan bought tins by the armful to carry home. And the famous houses in Kyoto, century-old names that had spent generations building their reputation, hit a wall. They physically could not grind enough. Several of the most respected producers began rationing, limiting how many tins a single customer could buy, capping wholesale orders, in some cases, pausing new accounts entirely. Not because they wanted scarcity, because the mills only turn so fast, and the spring harvest only comes once. Prices climbed, and the internet, which had just fallen in love with matcha, discovered it couldn't reliably buy it. This is the exact shape of a business with fixed, slow supply, meeting sudden, elastic demand. The demand can triple in a year. The supply cannot. And when those two lines cross, the price is the only thing that can move. So where does the money in that $7 latte actually go? Let's follow it. The farmer who grew and shaded the tencha captures a surprisingly thin slice. Agricultural commodities almost always reward the grower least, and matcha, for all its prestige, is no exception. The processor who steams, sorts, and stone grinds the leaf captures more, because grinding is the scarce step. The branded tea house that blends, packages, and puts its centuries-old name on the tin captures a large share, because the name is the product as much as the powder is. The importer and distributor take their cut, moving it across the world. And then the cafe. The cafe is where the real markup lives. That gram of powder might cost them 50 or 60 cents. They add milk, a paper cup, a barista, rent on a corner location, and the word matcha on a chalkboard, and they sell it for $7. The powder is a rounding error in that price. What you're paying for at the cafe is labor, real estate, and identity. What the farmer got is almost nothing, which is why the smart operators in this business are not trying to win by growing more tea. They're trying to own the layer where the margin actually lives. Some build a brand, a name and a story strong enough that customers pay a premium and buy directly, cutting out everyone in the middle. Some own the cafe experience, where a 50-cent input becomes a $7 ritual. Some secure long-term supply contracts with specific farms and processors years in advance, so that when the next shortage hits, and there will be a next one, they still have product while their competitors have empty shelves. The winners aren't fighting the bottleneck. They're positioning themselves on the profitable side of it. Let's do the honest math, two versions of it. The good year, you've locked in supply from a reputable processor before prices spiked. Demand is roaring. You're selling a branded 30-gram tin at $30 that cost you 8 or 9 to land. Your margin is fat, your product sells out, and the scarcity everyone else is panicking about is the very thing making your brand feel precious. You look like a genius. Now the bad year, a spring frost damages the first flush, so the ceremonial grade you built your brand on simply isn't available at any price you can pass on. The processor you didn't sign a contract with sells their limited output to someone bigger. Prices at your cost level double, but your customers won't pay $14 for a latte, so your margin gets crushed from both ends. You didn't do anything wrong. The weather and the mills decided your year for you. That gap between the operator who secured supply and the one exposed to the spot market is the entire game. So does matcha make money? Yes, enormously for the people standing in the right place. But notice where that place is. It is almost never the field. The romance of matcha is a farmer on a misty hillside and a granite wheel turning slowly. The Economics of Matcha is a brand on a tin and a cafe on a corner, both sitting on top of a supply chain so slow and so fragile that scarcity isn't a risk to manage. It's a permanent feature to be exploited. The powder was never really the business. The powder is the excuse. The business is the story wrapped around it, the shelf you control when everyone else runs out, and the $7 a person will happily pay for 50 cents of something that makes them feel calm. Matcha didn't get expensive because the world got greedy. It got expensive because, for the first time, the whole world wanted something that, by its very nature, can only be made a few grams at a time.